Joining us now is former New York State Senator and Democrat strategist David Carlucci. David Carlucci, thank you for joining us on Power Hour. Look, 5 days to go, then Donald Trump is in the White House. Who's going to lead the Democrat Party?
Well, it's a good question. I think we've got a large bench, but that's a big question in terms of who's going to lead the national party, the state party. And I think if we're talking about who will be the candidate for president in 2028, I think it's possible that we don't even see that person on the scene right now. I think American politics today is one where people want change, and they've been saying that for many cycles now. And so if you're an up and coming politician on the rise, I think that's something that the American public, the electorate, is really clamoring for. I think the historical saying on this would think otherwise in terms of you need a record, you need some accomplishments. But I think nowadays you see many politicians just rising to the top, not spending too long in any one office and moving as quickly as possible along that chain. So I think if we're talking about the next presidential candidate, I really believe it could be somebody that we're not even talking about right now.
So between now and 2028, we'll just see who comes along?
Well, I think so. I think it's a lifetime in politics. And so, as far as that, I think it'll be someone possibly that's new on the scene. But look, we're going to have an election for the Democratic National Convention that's happening in February. And I think now that we don't have the presidency, that role will take on a bigger piece of this in terms of being someone that's out there talking on shows and being a spokesperson for the party. But I also think you'll see people rise up naturally in the positions they're in. Hakeem Jeffries in the House, the minority leader for the Democrats in Congress. I think that's someone to really watch because they're going to be doing a lot of work come this session, being that it's the smallest majority that we've seen in about 100 years, and one of those smallest majorities ever that Republicans hold. So they're going to need about every Republican vote almost every time. And I think that's an opportunity that hopefully there'll be an opportunity to work across the aisle and get Democrats and Republicans to work together. I know not on every piece of legislation, but I'm hopeful that there are some pieces of legislation where there can be compromise. And I expect Hakeem Jeffries to really lead that effort to make sure that they can actually get some good pieces of legislation passed in this Congress.
Apart from Hakeem Jeffries, has, in your view, essentially no one? There are no big names in the Democrat Party that could lead?
Oh, well, there's plenty. But I mean, what does that mean, lead the party? Right? If it's about actually getting legislation passed on a federal level, I think you're going to look to people like Hakeem Jeffries in Congress to try to get things done. If it's about talking on talk shows, you have a plethora of people that can do that. Really talented.
They'll have to be better than Kamala Harris at that one.
What's that?
Oh, well, they'll have to be better than Kamala Harris at going on talk shows. But look, I also want to ask you, it's been 2 months now since Trump's win. What do the Democrats have to do so they can try and get voters back on side?
Well, I think right now we see that the GOP is really overplaying their hand. Donald Trump and many Republicans are talking about a mandate. When you really look at it, yes, Donald Trump won the election. We agree with that. But to say a mandate is, I think, a little bit too far-fetched. The fact that they're going to have this very small majority in Congress and are going to have to fight to get every piece of legislation passed. If they talk about a mandate, I think they're going to need Democratic votes to get things done. And the problem I think that Republicans can have is that I really think they're at a high water mark. Donald Trump has been promising policies that can only fit on a bumper sticker. And if there's not someone to blame, then his politics don't really work well. So now that he's going to be in charge and not have President Biden to blame or congressional Democrats, it's going to be a very hard road to walk. I hope he does well. I hope he can deliver for our country. But many of the policies that I've been hearing Donald Trump talk about, are just blame someone around him, blame whoever he can. And the biggest part here is the GOP ran on these bread and butter issues, but now they're talking about conspiracies. They're talking about Greenland, Panama, Canada, um, everything but America first. Instead, it sounds like America everywhere. So they ran on one set of policies, but now all they're talking about are another set of issues that are totally unaligned with bringing the cost of things down, talking about affordability, when meanwhile they're just talking about tariffs and raising the prices of everyday goods that Americans need. So I see that as very problematic. And I think Democrats really just need to tighten up their ship, keep on message in terms of fighting for working class families and actually delivering on those results where they can, whether it's in state legislatures or getting some victories in Congress. I think that's really where Democrats will prevail and show their true colors and do well as we move forward.
Okay, I disagree with you. I think that Biden was voted
Surprise.
out because of surprise, because people are not better off now than they were 4 years ago. And I think people are very optimistic that their cost of living experience is going to change under Donald Trump. And there's been so many changes in the 2 months that since he was elected. We'll get to the ceasefire deal in the Middle East in a moment. But I also want to ask you about Joe Biden's final address today. And he essentially warned Americans about Trump's incoming administration. Surprise, surprise. But he said today an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. How can he still be going on with the same lines that Trump's a threat to democracy when what we saw on November 5 was democracy in action?
Well, I think there's a long litany of things to point to why we should be concerned. And Biden, what he's talking about there is the fact of what we've seen, that people like Elon Musk are almost like a co-president to Donald Trump. And there is not that transparency about who's making these decisions. I think that's very clear and we can all see it. So that's why Joe Biden is saying that. At the same time, what he talked about is what we value in the United States is this transition of power. And even though Joe Biden disagrees with Donald Trump on many things, he says he's going to work with him on this transition and be as supportive as possible and hope that he succeeds as president, even though he is a Republican and he doesn't agree with him. But that is the tradition of our presidents and something that I think Joe Biden really values. And he's showing that in this final statement. And he's warning people, look, Donald Trump won. He's our president. But we still have to be vigilant and ask these questions as we would of anyone. But as Donald Trump is showing these colors in terms of almost a pay-to-play culture where it's concerning when we have billionaires, millionaires that are getting close access to the president. That's what's been being reported in the media. And I think we have to be very careful about that and know exactly what's going on, who has access to the president, and who is calling the shots in the White House.
Yeah, I think the threat to democracy is getting a bit old now. Donald Trump has been more transparent than ever, especially when you compare him to Joe Biden, who really just refused to do any press conferences, the least of any modern
how can we say that he's being more transparent than ever? I mean,
he held less press conferences than any other modern president.
But how is Donald Trump being more president? Is it just doing press conferences and riffing for an hour?
That's access. He's tweeting, he's giving access, he'll do long speeches where it's not reading from an auto cue. I think he's authentic, and that's what really resonated with voters.
And maybe that is true, right? That people appreciate that. But in terms of transparency, just speaking off the cuff for hours at a time doesn't mean that you're transparent in terms of saying who has access, who's donating money to the inaugurational committee, and those types of issues. So I think we have to be very careful about quality and quantity, and they're not the same.
So being very clear that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will be heading up Doge to make the government more efficient, that's not being transparent?
Well, that is not the extent of transparency in terms of having people on phone calls,
Phone
knowing who
calls.
is coming and going. Excuse me?
I, what has a phone call got to do with a threat to democracy?
Well, if you're having the president taking or the president-elect taking phone calls with foreign leaders and just having the richest man in the world conference call in and things like that, look, those things we need to be concerned about, where we have people elected to office or appoint.
But the president isn't hiding from the fact that he's now become friends with Elon Musk. I don't understand what the concern is.
Well, all I'm saying is that we should ask these questions and there should be actual transparency in terms of who is making these decisions. And the response I'm getting from you is that he's tweeting, he's on Truth Social, he's riffing for an hour, 2 hours. That's great. And he should do that. Do it as much as you can, sure. But also provide the actual details of what's going on in your administration. So
Okay.
all I'm saying, and I'm not necessarily accusing Donald Trump of doing anything wrong. What I'm saying is let's not be bamboozled. Let's not be confused by the fact that you can just talk for hours at a time and translating that to actual transparency.
Okay, have to move on. Joe Biden also refused to acknowledge that Donald Trump played a key role in brokering a ceasefire deal in the Middle East. What do you make of the timing of the deal? Should Joe Biden have at least acknowledged that Trump had a part to play?
Well, did Donald Trump acknowledge Joe Biden had a part to play here? I mean, it's kind of silly. A reporter asked Joe Biden, and he said, "Are you serious? Are you kidding?" It's almost we're acting as if Joe Biden is not responsible for this. And look, we should give credit where it's due. And yes, maybe there was pressure from Donald Trump, but to say that Donald Trump delivered this, I think is a far stretch. So I think, as Joe Biden was indicating, I don't think he's blaming anyone or taking credit away. But it's almost like Donald Trump, every time he puts something out, it's like he did it and only him alone. And I think that's not fair either.
Well, he certainly put a lot of pressure on Hamas. I have to talk to you about the inauguration. We know Michelle Obama is not going to attend Trump's inauguration on Monday. Her office didn't give any explanation as for why she won't be going, but we do know that Barack Obama will be attending the ceremony. What do you make of the decision? If Michelle Obama is all about unity, why isn't she going?
Well, we can't say. We don't know why she's not going. So it's really hard to put words in her mouth. Maybe she'll provide some more details in terms of what she is doing, but it's her prerogative to go or to not go, and it's really hard to to prognosticate on it when we don't know what her agenda is. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments and a lot of hearsay in terms of why she might not have gone, but it's really hard to predict in terms of what her personal schedule is, what she's going through personally. Who knows? We really can't judge that, so it's really hard to say.
Oh, I'm not sure if it's a scheduling issue. I have to get your thoughts on Gavin Newsom. Look, he's being heavily criticised for his handling of the devastating wildfires in LA. The state absolutely failed when you look at the way it failed to combat the fires, the way it just was not prepared to fight them. But now Gavin Newsom is trying to Trump-proof California. Take a look at this.
While Los Angeles burns, Governor Newsom's special session to Trump-proof California is underway in Sacramento, drawing ire from Assembly Republicans and Vince Fong alike.
The state legislature and the Democrats that control it, they've decided that spending money to sue an incoming administration was better than preparing for future fires and dealing with the fires currently at hand. That is not only tone deaf, but just the clearest example of misplaced priorities by this governor and the supermajority in Sacramento.
Is it tone deaf?
Well, when people say things like this, like, oh, they did this instead of that, is absolutely absurd. The state of California, like almost every state in this nation, has hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of legislation every year. So we can nitpick and say, oh, you did that. Instead, you should have safeguarded California from forest fires. But this criticism on California, I think, is a little too much. Unfortunately, we have a political climate right now where you have leading political figures that the first thing they want to do is accuse, blame, point fingers before having a helping hand go forward. I mean, California, they need a helping hand, not a pointing finger. And the first thing we see from one of the most powerful leaders in our country, and soon to be the most powerful leader, Donald Trump, is just blame. And maybe there is blame to go around, but is now the time? Instead, we should be talking about how do we put out these fires? How do we safeguard for the future? And you already hear congressional Republicans talking about conditions on aid. And then you ask them, what type of conditions? They don't know, but they just want to talk about conditions on aid. That's a very dangerous precedent, one that doesn't suit the American interest, and one that I think will be problematic in the future if you start politicizing aid to states. Look, California often gets criticized because they're taking very drastic measures to combat climate change. And we have to address that and realize that we're having these unprecedented natural disasters that are exacerbated by climate change. And sometimes there's only so much you can do. So California has some of the most extreme measures in terms of how to prevent forest fires. And should there be more? Could there be more? Maybe. And those are questions that we are fair to ask. But just to blame as soon as a hat is dropped, I think is very problematic and does nothing but try to elevate someone's political career.
David Carlucci, we are out of time. We will have to debate that on another show. Thank you so much for joining us, former New York State Senator and Democrat strategist David Carlucci. I do really appreciate you coming on the program.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you.